I'm Dan Whitney, an assistant professor in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at the University of Michigan. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend this meeting in person due to a scheduling conflict, but in this video, I'll talk about evidence-based findings to support the notion that musculoskeletal fragility may be implicated in the pathogenesis of unhealthful aging for adults with CP. So we know MSK fragility problems manifest early in development for individuals with CP, including some of the factors listed here. Recent work by us and others have shown, not surprisingly, that MSK fragility problems get worse as children with CP age into and throughout their adult years. Now we know that in the general population, MSK fragility is a major predictor of premature morbidity and mortality. So our question was, given the earlier presence of MSK fragility, how does that contribute to healthful aging specific to individuals with CP? In order to address that question, we have to think about muscle and bone for more than just function. Muscle and bone is incredibly important for function, physical activity, and mobility, which in turn is necessary for health, mitigating disease risk, and prolonging life. However, muscle and bone is also incredibly metabolically active tissues that regulate local and systematic processes, and typically through endocrine-like properties, such as having unique secretory profiles of chemokines, myokines, adipokines, as well as other signaling mechanisms. Muscle and bone also houses lipids that have unique properties depending on where they're being stored, which is fundamental for cellular metabolism and just physiology in general. However, lipids within muscle and bone can have profound interactions with health, disease, and function if pathological. And some of the regulators of MSK function, architecture, and biology specific to CP includes physical activity, innervation, neural innervation, and the hormonal or just the metabolic environment in which the muscle and bone is housed. Now we know that individuals with CP have low physical activity levels and altered innervation and a hormonal milieu. So now while more work is needed, we do understand that muscle and bone tends to be smaller, differently shaped, and has unique functional properties, which may be the link in the contribution of MSK and overall health is probably driven in part through some of these functional mechanisms. However, while less studied, it's not unreasonable to think that muscle and bone also has unique biological attributes that may be contributing to disease via independent and synergistic mechanisms with some of the functional aspects for healthful aging. So now when we thought of how to start addressing if and how MSK fragility contributes to unhealthful aging, we decided to focus on fracture. Fracture is the outcome of MSK fragility, and we know in the elderly population, it orchestrates a series of biological events that predisposes to premature morbidity and mortality. So instead of presenting specific studies and showing the effect sizes and going through the methodology about the burden of fracture, I decided to present the conceptual model. Now this conceptual model is based on the literature, but it's also based on our work that has been recently published in review or in preparation. Now, as far as our work goes, it comes from nationwide private and public insurance claims data that has large sample sizes. We also compared the pathways between adults with CP that sustained a fragility fracture compared to adults with CP that did not sustain a fragility fracture, and compared to adults without CP that sustained a fragility fracture. And from these comparisons, we're able to tease out the burden of fracture specific to adults with CP. Now, using these claims data, the first thing we had to do was establish that adults with CP did indeed have an elevated burden of MSK fragility, which we did, and others have also reported similar findings. In the next step, we started to see how fragility fracture, which is an indicator of MSK fragility, how that contributes to disease and mortality specific to adults with CP. Now, the conceptual model is as follows. An adult will sustain a fragility fracture, and this accelerates the rate of premature mortality. However, fragility fractures also increase risk for a variety of diseases and loss of function, such as a drop in physical activity and in some cases muscle wasting. While not well understood in the general population, fragility fractures are likely inducing or exacerbating certain factors that are driving the fracture mortality association. Now we know that fractures induce inflammation and often lead to pathophysiologic environments in which the heart and lungs seems to be particularly sensitive to and increases risk for cardiorespiratory disease. We know that cardiorespiratory diseases are among the leading causes of death for individuals with CP. A really nice paper recently by Ryan and colleagues found that mortality was 14 times higher due to respiratory diseases and 3.2 times higher due to cardiovascular diseases for adults with CP compared to adults without CP. Now, some of our own work that we have published or is in review has looked at different segments of this pathway because we're still in the early phase of this work. What we found is that fragility fracture is a robust risk factor for mortality at 3, 6, and 12 months, and work that's in preparation shows that the effect is sustained at 2 years after fracture. Fragility fracture is a robust risk factor for cardiovascular diseases, including ischemic heart disease, heart failure, and cerebral vascular disease. It also increases risk for respiratory diseases, including pneumonia, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and interstitial pleural diseases. Now, all models were adjusted for demographics, hypertension, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, and cancer. And when mortality was the outcome, the models were further adjusted for the cardiorespiratory diseases. When cardiovascular diseases were the outcome, the models were further adjusted for respiratory diseases and vice versa. Now, one of the major limitations of claims data is the lack of severity of CP or even type or distribution of CP. However, by adjusting for all of these diseases, we're able to get a proxy of disease and health status, which is associated with GMFCS. So we do get a bit of a proxy for severity of CP, and we did account for these. Now, through a series of secondary analyses, we found that the burden of fracture on these outcomes was present across age strata and prior to reaching the elderly years. It was also present for women and men in all fracture sites that we studied, and the lower extremities seem to elicit the greatest effect of these outcomes. So in conclusion, we have found a unique and profound burden of fracture for adults with CP. Now we have a lot more work to do to fully understand these pathways, in which we hope to inform clinical pathways to maximize healthful aging for individuals with CP. As I am not able to attend this meeting in person, please feel free to contact me over email with any questions, comments, or collaboration ideas. And thank you for your time and attention.